Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda. Before I get started, I am filming this on Friday, March 8th, but you will not see it for at least a month. I am going to review my top book from the Octafinal Group A in the Booktube prize. I have to hold my thoughts back until the results video comes out, but I also have a library book that needs to go back. So I'm doing this now. So the book I am talking about is King, A Life by Jonathan Eig. Very clearly a biography of Martin Luther King Jr. No surprise there. If you watched my very long reading vlog for this round of Booktube Prize, you saw that I admitted that I did not want to read this book. My heart fell when I saw it was in my group. I was dreading reading it. Basically for two reasons. One is just these, biographies, sort of straightforward biographies like this, I tend to find them dull. And this is long. There's that, and it has double pages, but neither here nor there about that. The other thing is, I grew up with two different narratives about Martin Luther King. I had what I was taught in school. He was a civil rights leader, did speeches, non-violence, all the things that were taught about Martin Luther King. That's all fine. Taught about all that. And then I would go home, and my very politically conservative parents would be, and I was a kid when Martin Luther King Day became a holiday. They would go off on, he was a womanizing communist. He was just a troublemaker. People are buying into this myth and it's not even true. So I had these two narratives going in my mind, and I looked at this book. I'm like, do I want to open that can of worms? Now, we'll get back to that. So, this book. Jonathan Eig, this is his third book. He previously wrote biographies of Lou Gehrig and Muhammad Ali, and I believe that's the order in which he wrote them. Lou Gehrig, Muhammad Ali, Martin Luther King, which actually kind of makes sense because you have an athlete who's kind of like athletics and civil rights, and then you're a civil rights leader. And the reason this book is coming out now is because in 2022, a number of documents, I think just covering a lot of things, but a number of documents were unsealed and made public. And among these were records that the FBI had about Martin Luther King. So we now have a bunch of new information about Martin Luther King. This is the time when we need a new biography. And it's very clear that Jonathan Eig is the person who needs to write it, because Jonathan Eig does something incredibly well in this book. And that is, he takes the information, he lays it out in a very clear, concise way that makes it very accessible to the reader. And then he does not insert his own feelings about it. So this is, in a lot of ways, a very impartial book about Martin Luther King. It's what I would call a warts and all book. So there you go. So, this book has, him as a child, growing up, going through school, starting as a preacher, and then starting the civil rights movement. There were a lot of things that I found in here that were very interesting. I found out that weird trivia. This is a very weird trivia, but as a young boy, he sang in a church choir, and that church choir was sent out to sing at the world premiere of Gone with the Wind. Something really wrong with that. It was an African-American church. So these were little African-American children singing at the premiere of a movie that romanticized slavery, but whatever. It talked about his dating life. One interesting tidbit I got out of there was from his friend, Harry Belafonte, who said that before meeting Coretta Scott, who he would marry, he dated a white woman whose name I can't remember, but it's in the book. It's actually, she personally is not that important. It's just, this is what happened. And she was the love of his life, and he wanted very much to marry her, but he was told that you cannot be a preacher in a black church and have a white wife. And so he had to end the relationship because of that. And I found that very interesting. I don't know how much that was something that ended up staying in my mind as I read the book, but I don't know how much it had to affect the rest of it. I found the discussion about his work in the civil rights arena very interesting. One thing that Jonathan Eig says is that for a man who's working in this field, he really didn't like conflict, and that was actually a drawback for him sometimes when dealing with authorities or white people in government, sometimes dealing with conflict within his movement, but he really tried to avoid conflict. He didn't like it. But, and that seems kind of strange considering what he was doing. But it also explained why he felt nonviolence was so important, and it made a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think there were a lot of approaches in the civil rights movement, and there's varying success with all of them, and even his movement was not always successful. But I think that his movement made the whole thing successful, if that makes sense. And then we get to the wiretaps. So if any of you BookTube Prize people who are in Octofinal Group A happen to also read last year the J. Edgar Hoover book, I would love to know the comparison between these two. But J. Edgar Hoover did not like Martin Luther King. And so he had gotten it in his head that Martin Luther King was a communist because this is, the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. And he was a womanizer, and he was gonna end him. He was going to just stop this. So he applied his influence with the Kennedy brothers, John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, who I didn't realize had a kind of reserved relationship with Martin Luther King. It was not a smooth relationship. And got approval to wiretap his home, his office, his associate's office, and to find dirt on him, to expose him as a communist and a womanizer. It really doesn't matter, I think, what they found. I'll say that right out, because my parents were the ones saying he was a communist and womanizer. Turns out now that these are the things that were unsealed, that he was not a communist. In fact, he was anti-communist. He was an anti-communist. So my parents fell for that one. He was womanizer. Big time. So here's where I come into my problem. I'm back to this. Here's a man who did wonderful things for our country. And he really was the face of a movement that struggled, but was ultimately, has been successful. We're not there yet. We know that we're not there yet. But, he is the face of that. And a lot of good came from that. Here's also a person, it's the same person who clearly had issues with women. And the way I say that is, he was married to Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott King quickly told her that he's the head of the household and you have to do whatever I say. She gave up her career as a singer to be his wife and the mother of his children. She saw it as a partnership, but in the transcripts, it would report how she would try to say something and he'd just tell her to get out of the way, get out of the room. We don't want to hear about you. So he was not, and they cite in these transcripts over and over again that he's not nice to his wife. Although she is a very respectable woman, they say that too. He's not nice to his wife. There are transcripts of him coming in from a trip, and I think he's even at home when he does this, and he picks up the phone, and he calls a woman, and he makes up a rendezvous, hangs up the phone, picks up the phone, calls another woman, sets up a rendezvous, hangs up the phone, picks up the phone, just repeatedly. And that sort of thing I find very troubling. Now, these are all very consensual. The women obviously thought they were like the only woman in his life other than his wife, but it was consensual. Except there's this one part, and this is where you have to give credit to Jonathan Eig. He puts it out. There exists a summary by FBI agents of what they heard. This is not a transcript. It is a summary. We don't have the actual proof. We just have the summary. So we don't know for sure how accurate this is. But it was they had bugged a hotel room where he had gone and a number of his male associates have gone. And in this recording, according to that summary, they brought in a group of women. It got uncomfortable. One of the women wanted to leave, and then there was a forcible action. Not by King, but King was there sort of egging it on. If that is true, and we don't know if it is, but if that is true, that puts things in a different light. You see what I'm saying? So now I'm still back to, how do I handle this? If he's having consensual affairs, if he's treating his wife horribly. He's treating his wife horribly. There's no getting around that. But it's consensual on the other side with the other women. that doesn't reflect well on any of them, but that's what it is. But if there is a case like this, and given the behavior that he had with other women, it's not unbelievable that there might be. We're talking about different things. So now I'm back to where I was. How do I handle this? And I don't feel like I can just ignore the bad to appreciate the good, because you can't. I think it's very important to recognize that this is a man who did a lot of good in one way, but he had some toxic issues in the other way. And Jonathan, in sort of, this is in the epilogue, which is not a spoiler because we all know what happens. This is the one sentence where Jonathan Eig puts his own feeling into it. And I think he did a beautiful job with it. This is exactly kind of what I came to, and why we need to look at all of Martin Luther King Jr. We need to recognize that he was a great civil rights leader, and he did a lot for African Americans, yes, but really all Americans. But he also had this other issue. He also didn't respect women, and he wasn't a good husband. He was an absent father. I mean, by all accounts, he was a good father when he was there, but he was never there. So he was an absent father and a not very respectful husband. And again, we don't know about that incident in the hotel room. That's just something that's in the record. But even without that, he did not treat his wife well. And this is what Jonathan Eig says. But in Hallowing King, we have hollowed him. Which is, I think, important. I think that's what this whole book is about, is you have to look, if you don't look at everything, then Martin Luther King becomes nothing more than a name and a face. And the truth is that he was a human like everybody else. Think of anyone, we're going to say in the political arena, because that's the most like this. Any of them, no one is perfect. They all have their things, and it might not be a big thing, but they all have their things. They're all human. Right? So a few days ago, and I would have put this up a month ago, I did the favorite people tag. And one of the questions was, name 3 politicians you like. And I had said Barack Obama and Pete Buttigieg and Katie Porter. The very next day, Katie Porter made a real sour grapes temper tantrum about losing her election. It was very surprising and not what I would have expected from her. She's human. That's one thing we know about Katie Porter. She doesn't lose well. Does that mean I still don't admire her? I still admire her. I think she still does a lot of good. I don't want to be near her when she loses something. But there. And it's like Martin Luther King. I am so thankful that we had this person, because I don't think anyone else had the skills to do what he did in the civil rights arena. But let's face it, he wasn't great with women. And as I was talking about with my husband last night, because this book actually sparked a really deep conversation with my husband about things like this. And we kind of agreed that he had heard the same, well, he hadn't heard about the communism, but the womanizing, he kind of knew about it rumor-wise, but, I told him about the wiretaps and everything. That, it's bad when your civil rights leader is a womanizer, but it's really bad when your preacher is a womanizer, because he's a religious leader in an Abrahamic religion where in their Big 10 rules, adultery is right there with murder. And so that almost is why I have an even bigger problem with the adultery. But he is a person, I'm not excusing it at all. I am saying this man did good stuff for the country, and he was human, and he did some horrible things. And it's important to look at it all. You cannot overlook the bad just to see the good. You have to be able to see them both. And I think what made me love this book, this is a 5-star book, if I haven't mentioned that, is that I really feel like in reading this book, I kind of grew as a person. Like my outlook on the world and how I handle things like this changed and grew to a more mature level. I had been happy since college with the overlook the bad to see the good thing, which is when you're 18, 19 years old, that's not an unreasonable way to do it. When you are older than that, when you get to be a middle-aged person, you need to have evolved in your thinking. And I think that this was a book that really pushed me. And I have not read nonfiction or biographies that do. Really recommend this book. I just really recommend this book. And I'm really interested to hear what other people think of it, because you bring yourself to the books you read. So a lot of my own experiences came in to what happened with me in this book. So I would love to hear what other people thought of this book. If you've read it, please let me know down below. I will be watching other people who are in Octafinal Group A to see what they thought of it. And yeah, so King, A Life by Jonathan Eig. Highly recommend it. It was I don't know if it will be my best book of the year, but I cannot see any book being a more surprising book for me. So there you go. Thank you very much. Like, subscribe, join my Discord. Let me know if you've read this book and what you thought of it. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.